building a great place to work and learn baseline surveys of HCPSS employees and students.
Madam Chair, as you know, research indicates that student engagement is one of the most critical components of student achievement, and that there is growing evidence and research that suggests that the actions and engagement of school leaders and teachers and other school-based staff are critical to help shape our student engagement. And if the board remembers, earlier this year, back in October, we surveyed all of our staff, our entire workforce, as well as students in grades 5 through 12, measuring levels of engagement. And we're very delighted to have with us tonight the Senior Director of Research for Gallup, Dr. Timothy Hodge.
Good evening. Thank you for your time tonight. I know you've got a lot on your agenda, and while budgets and policies and those kind of things are exciting for discussion and debate, she laughs. I get to work with different districts around the country on topics of engagement and well-being and hope and student success, and so do you with your policies and the procedures and the way the district operates. But I'm excited to be able to share some highlights from an exciting project that I've been a part of, and many others at Gallup as well. I'm actually based in our Omaha, Nebraska office. I spend quite a bit of time in our DC office, so I'm working with several districts in this area and have colleagues at our office downtown DC, so I'm excited to be able to spend a little time with them over the next couple days as well. Just a couple of background points, I guess, as we get started. One is that your work aligns with the engagement work that you're doing with both staff and with students aligns so well with your strategic plan. We don't see that in every district. Gallup's great at surveys. It's what we do for a living. There's many times when districts will bring us in to replace an existing staff survey, but they don't integrate into the message of how they operate as a district. And I appreciate that's something you've been real intentional about doing. I might need a hand on the slides here. Just a couple other thoughts. When I started working at Gallup 15 years ago, one of my first projects was to bring together the Nebraska State Teachers of the Year. So we went and looked back all of the living Teachers of the Year, and we had about 30 of them that were invited, and most were able to attend. And we took them through an early version of StrengthsFinder, which is our assessment to help people understand their natural predispositions, their talents, and what they do best. And so it was real exciting to be able to spend some time with those Teachers of the Year. The first thing that they said is, this thing is spooky because it feels like someone was following me around to know this much about me. The second thing they said is, how come I didn't know this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever the case was. And so there's been this appetite consistently to have more and more effort towards bringing strengths into the conversation earlier. You've been leaders in that effort. You're just launching this project with several of your elementary schools to help students have an opportunity to know their strengths early on. I'm going to try pardon me here. We'll see if we can pull up a couple of pictures to. There we go. Thank you. So just this week, we actually released a report that's available on our website. It's a 50-page report, which at this time of the evening is probably not next on your agenda. But I've got a couple of hard copies. But I'd encourage you to check this out. It's a real nice summary of a lot of work that Gallup's done over the last few years around education, and really weaves that story together, from staff selection to strengths development to employee engagement to student hope, engagement, well-being, student success, college and career readiness. Our work with Lumina and PDK is brought into that. The National School Board Association actually has a link to the report on the front page of their website as of this morning, so it's gotten some real nice buzz. One of the findings that we have in our broad work on employee engagement is kind of bad news. Only 30% of employees in the U.S. workforce are engaged in their work. So we define engagement as how involved with and how enthusiastic people are about their relationship with their job. And to have only 30% engaged in the U.S. workforce, you can do the math in your head. That means there's 70% that are not reaching their full potential. I see this slide as good news. I see this as untapped potential that we can further tap into. A lot of times leaders will say, well, we believe that 95% of our employees are engaged. Maybe we just write the test in a difficult manner, but the evidence shows that really 30% engaged is the average nationally, and I'll come into your results here in just a moment. We've also found consistently from our work, in 1999 we published a book called First Break All the Rules, which really introduced the idea of employee engagement to the business press. That book's done incredibly well over decades and is still on bestseller lists and real accessible. What we've consistently found is that engagement happens at the work group level, and although our employee engagement survey is not a manager evaluation, having the right people in place in management and in schools, having the right principals in place is critical. The Wallace Foundation, I mean, this is not a unique thought, but it continually drives home that point that having the right leaders in place makes a huge difference in terms of setting up a great environment to work and learn. So continuing on with that First Break All the Rules research, it's been updated many times since, and in fact, we just released the new database. We now have 27 million employees who've gone through the same core 12 questions that your staff went through back to 1996. So being a research nerd at Gallup is like being Charlie Bucket in a chocolate factory. Every day I show up and there's a new 10 megabyte file that I get to analyze. But we're able to study what's the some of you appreciate that. Maybe others wonder about me, but anyway, I love what I get to do.
Now that you mention it.
But we've been able to show that when a work group is engaged, their performance is incredibly different. Obviously, not all these metrics matter. The district is not about profitability, for instance, but Wells Fargo is, and they mention their engagement results on shareholder calls. So this language about engagement has woven its way into the fabric of many of the top organizations in the world, and really shows an impact. So it's not just a feel-good measure, but it's actually a do-good measure. Let's get a little closer to the action as it relates to schools. We care about lots of things in schools. We care about reading and math achievement as one of many measures of student success. So we were able to do a study in a large district in Texas, and we're able to study what are drivers of reading and math achievement on their Texas State Achievement Test. Well, a big driver is student engagement, which I'll comment more about in a moment. But again, a working definition of engagement is how involved with and enthusiastic you are. So in the minds of kids, of students, it's how involved with and enthusiastic you are about school. And for employees, it's about your job. So what are the drivers then of student engagement? Well, there's four major ones. The first is level. You'll see in your data here that being in an elementary school seems to be chemically different than being in a middle school and then in a high school. That, again, not new information, but context matters. It's important to understand the environment. The work environment's different in an elementary school. I have 4 kids at home, and they're elementary school age and younger. There's a different level of energy and a different way of channeling that energy and all kinds of other things that matter. So just as a talking point, the level of school matters in terms of engagement. We tend to see elementary school students more engaged on average than middle school. We tend to see middle school more engaged than high school, although depending on the size of middle schools and things like that, those can move around a little bit. But essentially, the smaller the kids or the younger the kids, the more engaged they are in the surveys that we've been able to conduct. Number of students matters as well. Probably not as much as some legislatures would have us believe, but having smaller class sizes tends to be a little better in terms of engagement than having large class sizes. If we were here to talk about budgets, we would have to make tough decisions about that, and you do, and your states do, and everything else. But small class sizes and lots of elementary schools are good things about engagement, but our systems have to manage through lots of dynamics. Here's another one. I wish we could eradicate poverty. Free and reduced lunch, the instance of poverty, and I'd probably say family educational culture is a better. If we had those data, it would probably say even more. What kind of support does a student have at home? Did they get breakfast this morning? Did they get a good night's sleep without interruptions last night? You've got probably hundreds of students in foster care. They're passing between one family unit to another on a regular basis. And so it's important to understand that each student has their own story, and that many of those stories impact how involved with and enthusiastic they are about school the next day. Do parents support their school pursuits, or do they try and direct them in other directions? So that has a direct impact on achievement, which has been well documented. It also impacts engagement. So Those are three things that we'd all love to click our heels together and change, but difficult things to manage through. Thankfully, the fourth box, which we're here to talk about tonight, teacher engagement, is something that we can manage to, that is more reasonable, that doesn't require the same level of fiscal note in terms of driving that as it would to reduce class sizes or to provide great home environments for students and so on. So teacher engagement is a big driver of student engagement, and that's why it's exciting to be able to measure both at the same time. Moving right along, so back in October, we measured employee engagement October 14th through the 28th, a 2-week field period starting on a Monday and going 2 weeks through the following Monday. It was an online survey. All employees had access to the web. We did email invitations for all employees, but acknowledging that some employees don't regularly check their email as a function of their job, there were some job groups we supplemented with a paper invitation directing them back to the web survey. We were able to achieve an 84% response rate, which if you did surveys for a living, you'd stand up and cheer now. It's very difficult to get 84% of anything to respond, especially on an optional survey when it's framed up as optional. It's a confidential survey. Employees did log in with an employee ID so that we could identify who they are, and as we cut the data lots of different ways, we were able to include their responses, but we never report individual level data to anyone, including anyone in this room or anywhere else. I actually block access to myself, so I can't even access individual level responses because I wouldn't want to accidentally reveal someone's individual results. We only report results at a work group of 5 or more. Most reports in schools are at the school level, so that's never an issue. But even in central office jobs, you had 6,620 employees across the district payroll that responded to the survey. So if there's small departments here in this building or other central office roles, if it was a work group of 5 or less, then it was suppressed and kind of rolled up to the next level. So I think that helps. I think Gallup's reputation helps in terms of being a respected name in the survey business, and we were able to achieve that kind of response rate. Certainly, several people in this room and lots of others were involved in setting up the organizational structure and communicating well about it. You did a great job with the videos and reminders and things like that to encourage that. So the next bullet point you see is that the Howard County Public Schools grand mean, the average of those 12 employee engagement items, was a 3.79. I'm going to put that number in a bit more context, but that was on a 1 to 5 scale where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree. So 5 high, 3.79 was the average across the 12. These are the 12 elements of engagement, or the 12 questions. I know it's kind of an eye chart to see on the screen. I believe the items are provided in your handout maybe as well. If not, we can certainly.
We would like that.
Yeah, we can certainly get that for you. Again, these items are not a secret. They're in millions of books on bookshelves everywhere, and we don't change the wording, although some people would like us to. In fact, everyone would like us to change some words, but we've been real consistent. We've realized if you stop messing with the items and start asking them the same way over time, you can actually start to notice trends in the data, which is novel. So this is essentially your entire employee survey. One kind of warm-up question, overall, how satisfied are you with the district as a place to work? And then we go into 12 questions that really tap into that emotional relationship you have with the job. So we collect 6,620 surveys, put them in our magic machine, and what do we come up with? Well, in one way of looking at it, we come up with 3 different types of employees. We come up with that engaged employee, which is the one who says, sure, I can help, I'm glad to. They're the one who raised their hand, they volunteer for committees, they get involved, they show up early and stay late. They do everything that's expected, but often more. They're the ones who pick up a piece of trash on the way in the parking lot, not because it's in their job description, but because they take pride in their workplace and they want visitors to feel welcome and so on. So clearly that's our goal. As I mentioned, less than a third of employees in the country are in that first bucket of engaged employees. About half of most workplaces fall in the middle category, which I'm going to call kind of a holding pattern. The official term we use is not engaged, which doesn't mean they're disengaged. That's the next category. They're just waiting. They're doing most of what's expected of them, but probably nothing more. If you come to them asking with an additional project, they may kind of roll their eyes and say, why don't you ask a few more people? If you can't find anybody, then come back, and if you grovel a little bit, maybe I'll help. You know, they're not unwilling and they're not problems. We're just not tapping into what's what's fully there and their full potential. We're not getting that heart connection with the job. It's probably more of a transactional relationship with their work. Then there's the third category, which are the actively disengaged. Not only are they in a negative place, but they're recruiting from a negative place. They're hoping to bring others along with them. And so these are the negative water cooler conversations often have actively disengaged employees as a part of that, trying to bring other people into a gripe session with them rather than getting to the bottom of the problem. We all deal with issues in the workplace, and most of us don't enjoy that, but some of us want to sit in that for a while, and some of us want to hurry up and get it taken care of and solved and fixed so it doesn't happen for someone else. So as you think about that, I'm going to show a couple of pictures here that help put your data in context along those three categories. It's one thing to say on a 1 to 5 scale what's your number, but to think about it in those categories can be helpful. Are there questions at this point about the kind of that's background kind of theory, 5 minutes or less about 40 years of work, but kind of helpful to have that terminology in hand as we move into your data. Okay? Yeah. So let's look at the engagement index. So on this index, we're going to look at the percent of employees that are engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. Back to the last slide. And I'll provide this as a handout if you've got, so you can see in front of you as well. In the U.S. working population, this mirrors what I showed at the very beginning. 30% in that top green bar, 30% are engaged, 52% not engaged, and 18% that show up as actively disengaged. That's the U.S. working population. We do polls every night. On some of the polls, we ask people to rate their workplace, and so having that engine of the Gallup poll is helpful when we want to look at what's the U.S. working population really look like. So then the next question would be, what about organizations who've signed up to be intentional about measuring and managing engagement moving forward? This is our client database, and in this is first-year clients only, because as you would imagine, if you put some time and effort into managing engagement, you actually see some benefit to that. We're talking with you about baseline data, so this is probably the best comparison group for you. Other organizations who are just entering this initiative for the first time. It's a bit better than the U.S. working population, but essentially the same. 32% engaged, 16% actively disengaged. When we look at all organizations in our database, the numbers get a lot better. So this includes first-year clients, but also includes organizations who've been working towards managing engagement for several years. The numbers get a lot better. So there's good news here in that with effort, engagement can change at the work group level and across organizations. 47% engage, and the active disengagement drops down to 12%. I work with some school districts where the active disengagement is a single-digit number, 8, 9%. Still ends up being hundreds of people, but boy, if you can manage down to just a handful of people in each building that are actively disengaged, imagine how different the principal's day can look and how much less time they spend managing those actively disengaged employees and are able to really invest in the potential of everyone. So your results are similar to the second bar, which is other first-year clients, although it's better than that. So if you'd asked me coming in blind, and I work with dozens of districts, so if you said what would the baseline data look like, I would point to that second bar and say I suspect it'll be 32% engaged and 16% actively disengaged. You're actually at 34% engaged and only 12% actively disengaged. So particularly the active disengagement is much lower than I would have expected. And again, when you think about this across 7,000 employees, 8,000 employees, I mean, we gave all of them the opportunity, but I mean, there's faces behind those numbers, I guess I'd say. So baseline data, 34% to 12%. When we look at the ratios, we look at the percent that are engaged to the percent that are actively disengaged. So your rule of thumb, your number is you've got 2.83 engaged employees for every actively disengaged. 3 to 1 is kind of a rough baseline place that you're at. And the first-year client database you'll see is 2 to 1, so you're much better than that. Again, because you've reduced the denominator. If you can root out some of that active negativity, it really makes all the numbers look better. So that's kind of the comparison component. Now, the best thing to compare to is where you were last year. we weren't here last year to know. So next year, the report will have the best point of comparison, which is where were you in year 1 and where are you in year 2, and then we'll move forward on into the third year and beyond. So let's look at your district results and kind of peel that back a bit to help. Are there questions, I guess, here as we, yeah, please.
The comparisons that you're making are against the database. Do you have a slide that compares against other school systems?
So we don't right now. We could, but it's a convenient sample, so it's not a large enough database in our 3-year rolling database. Our work and engagement has doubled each of the last 3 years. So it's growing so fast that it skews towards first-year clients too much for us to feel. We're incredibly conservative when we report databases, so our thresholds are pretty high. Next year we probably will report that, but this year it's just not as stable because it's got so many first-year. Roughly looks exactly the same as the client database. I mean, the school districts are not more or less engaged than other types of organizations on average. Big numbers tend to act alike.
True. But mathematically speaking, we're comparing a first year, which is us anyway. So mathematically, what's the issue with comparing against other first years?
We could look at first-year education services database. That is a cut that we could provide. We actually do have a result on K-12 teachers, teachers only. So the other issue we have with our education database is many districts say we really care about engagement, so we're going to survey all of our teachers. You've said we really care about engagement, so we're going to survey all of our employees, more than half of which are teachers, but a couple thousand more that are not classroom teachers. So in your case, and that's our recommendation. There's other districts in this area and around the country that do a census of all employees, but we do have a cut about just K-12 teachers that I'll show you in a moment.
Is that something as a follow-up you could provide to compare HCPSS versus other first-year school systems?
If we have enough that it is. I'm not sure how helpful it would be because there are varying sizes of districts and different places around the country. But let me take a look at that, and if it would be helpful, it's sure something I would provide.
Yeah, one of the things that I would appreciate in order to understand this is, you said our 84% response rate is pretty high. I'd be interested to know how that fits into the other comparisons, because when you look at what the size of your sample is and what that represents of your whole, that also gives you a different perspective in interpreting the data.
Right.
Okay.
So, and your response rate is better than we always see. I mean, our average response rate is over 80%, but usually it's 81, 82%. It varies. If there's paper surveys, they tend to have a lower response rate than web surveys. So you did a bit better than I expected, particularly in the first year as you're encouraging people to do this. And honestly, particularly in this environment where there's surveys for every grant application, there's surveys for every interested party, there's a new survey every Monday. So the fact that folks made this a priority, now it's a 5-minute survey. I mean, it's 13 questions. It takes longer to log in than it takes to complete the survey. So I think that's to our advantage. It's not a 20-page survey, but yeah.
How many points are statistically significant on this?
Well, in this, the databases are so large that statistical significance is so much a function of sample size that almost anything would be statistically significant.
So one percentage point on this would be statistically significant?
Yeah, when you're talking about 26 million people, less than 1% would be statistically significant. When we talk about at the work group level, so think of an elementary school as an example. If you look at an elementary school from October 2013 to what will be their October 2014, if a school moves by 0.2 of a point on any item on that 5-point scale, we call that meaningful significance as a rule of thumb. That's meaningful change. And on their scorecards, they would see an up or a down arrow if an item moves by 0.2 of a point or more. But in this case, if you reduce your active disengagement by a point or two from 12 down to 11 or down to 10, that ratio is really going to pop because, again, that's the key metric there.
Ms. DeLace.
Yes.
Yes. Did you use a psychometrician to help develop these questions?
Yeah, sure.
For significance? So they weren't randomly selected. How did you come up with with the questions?
With the 12 core items that we
Right.
use? Yeah, so, I started at Gallup in January of 2000, and First Break All the Rules was published in 1999. So by then, we'd actually arrived at these 12 questions. But for over 30 years, Gallup did surveys in workplaces, and most of them were 150 question surveys, just like everyone else did at the time. And we came to the conclusion that by about the third page of a survey, people kind of check out, and you start to lose the quality of the data. So we said, how can we capture as much of the variance as possible with as few of items as possible? And so we arrived at that core set of 12 items. We care about each word in an item, so we try to make the item as short as possible and the list of items as short as possible as well. We also want it to be something that works across different work domains, so financial services or government or healthcare or Argentina or the United States or Canada. So we're intentional about saying, what are those core elements of engagement? There's a lot of things that matter that we don't measure on our survey, and you capture through other forms. We don't ask about the quality of the food service or whether the parking lots are lit or the restrooms are clean or any of those kind of things at all. We really are trying to get at what's your heart connection to your work. So yeah, there's decades of work that's gone into arriving at those items and ongoing research all the time. Job security for people like me. Yeah. So let's dive into your results here. So that last bar, 34, 54, 12, that bar shows up on the left-hand side of this chart, but let's look across different cuts within those 6,000 plus employees. So you see at the bottom the sample size. The first bar represents 448, which it's labeled as admin. Basically that means not school-based. I'm not sure that's quite the best way to explain it if there's a term that you're all more familiar with, but these are the folks that are probably calling this office home, transportation department, operations, finance, all of those IT, all of those type of jobs would roll into that. You see those results more, sorry?
They're not administrators?
No, I think it's administrators outside of schools.
Right, so by admin, I don't mean like principals and assistant superintendents. I mean not elementary, middle, high, or based in the special schools. So again, admin might not be the right term. Maybe operations or central office would be a better term. But those 448 respondents represent those job groups. The third bar, then, the next one over, is the elementary schools. Note the elementary, middle, and high. I mentioned kind of the punchline early on was elementary schools tend to be more engaged than middle schools. Middle schools tend to be more engaged than high schools. You see that trend play out in your district as well. So again, not a surprise. You've got 38% engaged in your elementary schools and only 9% actively disengaged. So you see that 4.22 to 1 ratio, which is really powerful. Imagine if your high schools had that same kind of ratio of engagement to actively disengaged. Now, again, every school district would love to have high schools at a level that looks like elementary schools. That's what we tend to see in the data, but yeah, that's the starting point. Please.
You're talking about the adults, not the students.
Correct. This is the employee survey results, right. But it mirrors the student survey results in that way. And I don't know, there's a lot of reasons why that's true. Class size and certainly the depth of relationship that a teacher builds with a student is different if you spend the entire day with them than if they're moving around from one class to another. High school educators are more experts about content. Elementary educators are more experts about a classroom of kids and generalists about content. That's kind of a flippant way of saying that. But there's more time with a smaller group of students at the elementary level, which does build depth of relationship and collegiality that's different. So there's different dynamics going on there. The size of most high schools, I mean, just think you've got 5 or 6 elementaries, maybe more than that feed into each high school. So the size of the number of people in that building goes up so much, and it really can change things. But so you see that trend, elementary being most engaged, then middle, then high. Your special schools actually have a level of engagement that looks more like elementary school. On the percent engaged, there's 15% actively disengaged, which is more like the high school. So that ratio falls somewhere between middle and high schools. And but those are unique situations in those special schools, and we combined them all into one data cut here. So as you review results school by school or location by location, the story's probably more at that level. But that's the additional cut there. One other thing I wanted to cut into is what's the engagement index by level, just looking at the teachers. So the previous slide was all employees at each of those level locations, but in this case it's just teachers. So of your 6,620 respondents, 3,705 of them were teachers. Your teacher ratio is 32% engaged to 11% actively disengaged. On the previous slide, you remember overall it was 34 and 12, so a 2.83. Your teachers are a 2.91. So teachers are a bit more engaged than non-teachers if you just look at that cut. And again, that's a trend that we see nationally across most districts where that's true. And then you see the same trend play out where elementary teachers are more engaged than middle school teachers more engaged than high school teachers as a starting point. Yes?
And when you guys cut this data, do you look at pay, gender, educational level, those type of things, and do any kind of ANOVA, MANOVA type statistical analysis between all the parametric issues there to see are there certain things that are indicative one way or the other on the questions that are being asked?
So we didn't specifically with yours. I'm going to show you one cut about length of service, but those are things we can go back and look at, and certainly are things we can build into the master list this summer. So if we can arrive at what those most important questions you're curious about, it's easy for us to do that because we've got employee ID numbers linked to each survey result. We can add any information we want to look at about that. There's a general relationship between pay and engagement, but it's not as dramatic as you might think. Workplace autonomy tends to drive more engagement. So teachers often feel like I'm in my room all day long, and if I'm really autonomous about how I manage what happens during the day, and there's less policies and regulations that govern that, we tend to see more engagement. But so there's some general trends like that we published on more broadly, but if you'd like to look at that specifically within the district, we'd be glad to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So one other cut that I wanted to show you, and then we'll get into some summary points and talk a bit about the student piece. So we look at engagement by length of service. I would have, had we been earlier in the day, I would have asked, but you just want to know, so here we are. This is a trend, again, we see nationally where the newest employees, regardless of the type of work, whether it's in a school or in a bank or working at a retail store, whatever the case might be, there's a certain honeymoon effect about joining a new job. Now, part of it is yesterday I was unemployed, today I'm employed, so I'm glad to be here. You said yes, I said yes, everything's great. Of course I'm a 5, but it does take a bit of time to develop the level of engagement we're talking about on certain items. Like I have a best friend at work. If you just moved to Howard County to take a job as a teacher, a week onto the job, you're probably not going to say, I have a best friend at work, and strongly agree with that. Certain items might take some time to develop and so on. We see as the reality of the work sets in, engagement tends to kind of stabilize or drop off a little bit. That 3 to 10 year cut, the third bullet point there, is about, I guess, about a third of your total employee population, and 10 to 20 years is about another third. So most of your employee base sits at that 3 to 10 or 10 to 20 year kind of tenure cut there. We tend to see nationally a bit more of a kick up at the end of a career. Those that have been on the job more than 20 years, we tend to see a little bit more of a rebound. So in some industries in particular, we'll see that 20-year veteran plus level of engagement is almost the same as a brand new employee. Whoa. So it's like we've kind of worked through all the stuff about this. I found what I do best every day. I've really positioned myself well and kind of built back up to that. We're not seeing that same, the trend's moving in the right direction, and there are about 1,000 there. So if we cut it at 30 plus years, and maybe we'd see some of that trend kick back up a little bit. But it does cause us to pause and think about, are we being intentional about engaging every employee? We're very intentional about new employees. One of the questions is, I know what's expected of me at work. We're very intentional about that on the first week on the job, making sure you know what's expected. If you've been here 15 or 20 years, we probably assume you know what's expected, and if anything changes, I'll let you know. I've used that line with my wife. It doesn't work very well. So I've stopped using it, but or tried to. But so you kind of notice a little bit of a trend there that is a bit disturbing, but not atypical. This is not unique to Howard County, but it does cause us to say, what can we do to be more intentional with each of those kind of cuts of employees as we look at it demographically like that? So this is the first time that you've seen this, and it's at the end of a long meeting, I understand. But one of the things that I guess is
We don't look engaged?
no, what you
Just
the
making
fact that you're still all here is a good sign. Remember, engagement's involvement with and enthusiasm for. The involvement piece, every seat's still full, and at this point in some meetings, that's not true. So, no, you certainly are committed to the work that you're doing, but. What I have the benefit of perspective of working with clients over many years, and also working with many different districts around the country. Some much smaller and some much larger. So certainly have a different level of perspective. One of the things I'd like to share with you is that these are baseline data, but the future can look very bright. We see in our global workforce only 13% engaged. The U.S. workforce is up to 30% engaged. The average of our client database is 47%. And the GGWA, which is Gallup Great Workplace Award winners, these are the top organizations, 32, I believe, that were awarded that just a couple weeks ago, one of which is actually a school district in suburban Omaha, Nebraska, which is, I drive through Millard Public Schools on my way to the office each day, and they actually were one of the award winners. So we have had school districts be the best places to work in across all organizations, along with the Ritz-Carltons and all the others that are recognized for their excellence in the workplace. So the average of those Gallup Great Workplace Award winners is 63% engaged. Wow. Imagine how different it would feel if you doubled the amount of engagement of the employees of the district. Now again, that's a long-term project. That's not going to happen by just clicking our heels together and hoping it does. I mean, incremental progress. If you see your results go up across a district by a few hundredths of a point from the first to the second year, that's a win. You'll see some schools that'll go up by 2 or 3 tenths of a point. That'll be a big win. And there'll be some that'll go down because there's issues going on and things that are changing. And when you look across the board, I would suspect that next year you'll have double the number of schools that grow relative to those that stay the same or decline. And that's incremental progress. But those Gallup Great Workplace Award winners, I think, have all been working on this for at least 3 years. So you've got to have a long-term view about this. But there's some real short-term kind of actions that can take place. Couple of points about how do you get there. This is included in your handout, but 3 simple points. One is, let's start by selecting the right people in the first place. Every time, I've been at Gallup 15 years, and I've said, I hope when I retire from Gallup, I'm the least talented person on our payroll. Because my talent's not going to change over time, but that would mean every time we hire somebody, we raise the bar about expectations. You've been intentional about hiring, and you're including some information about the talent, that untapped potential about people, and that every hire might be better than the person who's retiring or leaving to work in a different district. Selection certainly matters, particularly selection and positioning of the leaders that are setting employees up for success makes a big difference. The second is developing employee strengths. When we ask on a Gallup poll those 12 questions, so we coded, are you engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged? Then we asked, how do you spend your time with your manager? Does your manager primarily focus on your strengths? Do they primarily focus on your weaknesses, or do they ignore you? You don't even maybe know who your manager is. Well, guess what? The worst thing that can happen is to ignore, right? I mean, kids act up when they're ignored. Adults act up when they're ignored. That's the worst thing that can happen, is if you ignore employees and don't provide any kind of management or support. It's better to focus on weaknesses, and in fact, it's typical for managers to focus on weaknesses. In employee review sessions, the typical conversation goes something like, you did fine this year, here's some things we need you to work on, do you have any questions? It's not as much about recognizing who you are as a person, what you do best. Every employee has done something well. If not, we ought to wonder whether the manager and the employee are both in the right roles. But certainly, when a manager focuses on the strengths of an employee, that active disengagement drops to literally 1%. So our pollsters interview 1,000 people on a random sample to get the right margin of error. We only found 9 people out of 1,000 who were actively disengaged and said they had a manager who focuses on their strengths. So if there's a magic, kind of secret sauce about how to drive engagement, having managers who focus on the strengths of employees is probably the best evidence we have about that. Most Americans say they don't get to use their strengths. They don't get to do what they do best every day. More than 10 million people have gone through StrengthsFinder as one of several ways to identify your strengths, but this is one of the ways that your district has approached professional development this year. All of your principals have gone through StrengthsFinder, have had a feedback session about their top 5 talents and with a coach from Gallup, and really had an opportunity one-on-one with a Gallup expert about this to say, what is it that you do best? Who are you as a leader? How can you best use your natural talents to drive success in your school? And then on top of that conversation, each principal also had a conversation with the Gallup consultant one-on-one to go through their survey results, to be able to think about not only what are my strengths personally, but what's the context of our school, both with the employee and the student results. And then the last, and this might be a dicey topic after the pre-break conversation that you all had about well-being, but there's a linkage here between employee engagement and employee well-being. We've been able to study this in partnership with the Healthways organization out of Atlanta, have done a lot of polling work about employee engagement, which is kind of your workplace well-being, and other measures of well-being, your financial, your physical, your social, your community well-being, and there's a real relationship there. Organizations that invest in engagement have less medical claims on their health care policies, because if you've got a great place to work, there's less accidents on the job, particularly when we look at manufacturing. We've got a relationship we've written about in Caterpillar where you've got largely men largely driving forklifts and operating heavy equipment who have fewer accidents on the job when we've got engagement. In hospitals, there's less medical errors when nursing teams are engaged, and they actually share what happened on the last shift before they leave, and you have less medical errors. And so there's certainly a relationship there, but there's also a relationship between being engaged, highly engaged, and having a low level of stress. And we know that has an impact about heart disease and other disease burdens that are preventable. So if we would think about, from a healthcare policy, not just managing our healthcare system is more about managing sick care. What if we created a situation where people were less stressed and more engaged in their work? I suspect there's a relationship there, and we're really starting to see that when organizations combine those efforts about engaging employees, it has an impact on well-being. I'm going to move into a couple of highlights from the student data, but before we go there, are there questions about the employee piece that you'd like to have me address quick here?
Board members?
We're just still engaged.
You're doing fine. Oh, that's great. Okay. Hold those questions, and if you've got them, please interrupt as we go. But I don't want to just
No, that's fine.
just go all the way through. So just a couple other ideas I wanted to share with you.
Mrs. French is so excited she's standing up. So
I have a standing desk at the office. I look like a preacher behind a pulpit most of the time when people walk by. I rarely sit down, so I get that. So this model ties together much of the work that you're doing in conjunction with your team members from Gallup around student measures. We're starting by measuring the strengths of some of your students through the Naviance platform from 5 of your elementary schools and other places. We've got access to be able to assess the strengths of students. And by the way, it doesn't have to be formal assessment. Great teachers are always figuring out what kids do well and trying to leverage that and draw that out. I mean, that's not a novel concept either, but to be intentional about knowing what you do best and setting up a context where you can do more of that makes a huge difference. So what does strengths awareness really drive? Hope and engagement are the two big drivers there. So hope is what are your ideas and energy for the future? Do you have a big goal out there in the future? And do you have some steps that are going to help you get to that goal? And I'll unpack hope in a moment. Engagement, again, we've just talked about that with employees. With kids, it's largely the same thing. How involved with and enthusiastic are you about school? And then a big outcome is well-being. So again, career, physical, financial, community, social, that well-being is a big driver. And academic success is a big outcome that we ought to care about. But if we're just graduating students at a high rate and placing them in colleges, but they don't know themselves well, they're not prepared for life outside of the education system in a meaningful way, we're probably not serving them well as a system. It's not just about the academic success, but it's multiple measures, which, again, Gates and others have talked about multiple measures. Those are both outcomes that make a difference. So the student survey was a 20-item survey conducted from October 1st through November 1st. We just did the survey on Tuesday through Friday because some of the questions asked about yesterday, and we wanted yesterday to have been a school day, so our well-being questions, we care about kids on Sundays, but we can't impact what happens on Sundays as much as we can during the school days. So being a school-based measure, we did that. So 20 items, and it measures hope, engagement, and well-being. A handful of items in each of those. Some of those hands have 6 fingers, I guess, but a few items in each of those 3 constructs. Again, about an 8 or 9 minute survey, all online, and it's 5th through 12th grade students only. So most of your elementary schools, maybe all of your elementary schools, would have had just a 5th grade report, and then the reports were provided grade level by school. So we didn't have to have individual student ID login, so it allowed us to be able to do that without having explicit permission about that, because there was no identifiable information about the student except the fact that they were at this school and they claimed that they're in this grade. There were some self-report demographic, but those were only reported at aggregate, no individual student results provided either. So the 3 things we measured, again, hope, engagement, well-being. Your report includes a summary about this, so I'll just talk in general rather than specific in the numbers. But again, hope is ideas and energy you have for the future. There's 3 items on hope that capture that agency component, which is really, do I believe I'm an agent about my own success? Can I take some ownership about that, and do I have big beliefs about the future? So things like, I know I will graduate from high school, or something like, I know I will get a good job after I graduate would be another example of an agency type hope item. Then we get into some of those pathways. What's going to help me get to that goal? It's not, there's that crisis of confidence thing. Everybody thinks they're going to achieve, but they don't know how to get there. Well, we measure the how to get there piece as well. There's an adult in my life who cares about my future is a beautiful item that's about who's surrounding me and going to help set me up for success. I can think of many ways to get good grades. I can find lots of ways around any problem. Those are those pathways type items. So we collect those on an individual level, but then we also aggregate them so you have a hope score, which is reported in your packet. Last year, you did have several schools participate. This year, it was a near census. You had 28,000, just a bit more than that, actually, students that participated. So almost all of your 5th through 12th graders participated. And the students had the option to opt out if they wanted to. I'm not sure that managed at the local level, but there was no record of this exact student did or did not complete the survey. It was an optional survey, but most students are willing to participate in that kind of thing. And then you see the U.S. overall. I would just note, because I'm a survey scientist and I have to, this is a convenience sample. It's 600,000+ students around the country, so it's a large number, but it caused me to wonder, what about the other 35 million students in the 5th through 12th grade across the country, right? So yeah, 600,000 is a lot, and it probably closely mirrors, but that's kind of reckless to assume that. So it is a large database, but just kind of there from a reference point. We certainly do see some trends that are helpful when we look at that, but you see your data shown here. The district level data are less important probably than the school level data because you manage to it at a school level, but for all of them it's really treated as baseline, because although some schools did measure last year, there weren't kind of intentional district-wide efforts to manage to these pieces. So that's hope for students. Student engagement, again, how involved and enthusiastic they are about school. A couple of these items actually mirror items on the employee survey. So I have a best friend at school is an item on this survey. It always intrigues me that everyone thinks that's the best item on the survey for kids. Every kid ought to have a best friend at school. But when we say I have a best friend at work, everybody wonders why we're asking that. And it's like when we stop being students and start being employees, all relationships are supposed to cease or something. But the item works for students and for employees. I feel safe in this school, again, ties into some of the conversations from today's board agenda. There's 2 items at the bottom I'll call your attention to that are real powerful for us to be able to make a relationship about here. My school's committed to building the strengths of each student, and I have at least one teacher who makes me excited about the future. When students can strongly agree to those items, they're 30 times more likely to be engaged than if they disagree with those items. So again, what's the silver bullet to driving student engagement? having a school that's committed to building the strengths of each student, and having at least one teacher who makes each student excited about the future. And we work with districts where the principal says, every kid's name's on the board here, every teacher's name's across the board here. On this grid, I want to make sure there's at least one teacher who takes responsibility for every kid in this building, and if a teacher doesn't volunteer or someone else in the building doesn't, the principal does, and makes those intentional efforts to make sure there's that individual relationship that's important in their life. So a lot more we could say about that, but those two items are new on the survey this year, and we really believe we had a lot of studies previously, but the first time systematically we've captured that. And again, if students can say strongly agree to those two items, they're 30 times more likely to be engaged than if they can't say yes to those items. So we believe that's pretty important to pay attention to. And the last piece is with student well-being. Again, the way the room's set up, that's kind of an eye chart. But on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a ladder with steps numbered 0 through 10, where 0 represents the worst possible life and 10 represents the best possible life. And we ask, on what step would you place yourself today? And then we ask, on what step would you place yourself 5 years from now? It's important because we all kind of have a perspective where we're at today. If I'm a 4 today and I'm an 8 in 5 years, that says something different about my well-being than if I'm a 4 today and I believe I'll be a 3 in the future. And there's students who have a terrible medical diagnosis, or there's a family situation. I mean, we've got individual students who do give almost every rating on both of those scales, but real helpful to say, where are you today and where do you believe you'll be into the future? Yeah.
Tim, since this slide deck is not available on board docs for us, is there any way we can get a copy of it? Because
absolutely,
I'm not mentally able to absorb all this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
in the back of your board packet is a listing of the mean scores of hope, engagement, well-being for student surveys, as well as the employee. But yeah, I'm glad to share this as well. And this is actually just a snip from a larger, more comprehensive report about the district level results. Maybe it'd be even more helpful if we just provide that report to you that gives.
This would be nice as well.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a segment from that full report that gives some of the talking points as well.
We often post the
Let me kind of conclude with a couple of things that I've observed from the perspective we've got here and the things we'd like to kind of drive home as summary points. One is that word baseline. This is the first year that you've measured it. Lots of people like to say which school's the highest, which school's the lowest, all those kind of things. Sure, it's important to pay attention to that, but really the most important data point is what direction is a school headed from one year to the next, and we won't know that until next year. So we really want you to treat this as baseline information. We've taken some time to introduce the concepts. We've had time with managers, with principals, one-on-one and in groups, and people are really starting to get their head around, what does this mean, why do I care, and what are we going to do about it? So that's really been the theme for this year. The two items that were the strongest relative to the 12 employee engagement items were my coworkers are committed to quality work, and my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. So those two items were the two that really stood out among the 12 items for the district and were relative strengths for you all. The next point is engagement happens at the local level. Each school and each team has a story. It's not okay to say, we're a 3.89 and that's where we all are, because some are at a 4.2 and some are at a 3.2 and everything in between. So it's real important to say at a work group by work group level, what's our situation? Let's have a conversation about it and let's make a goal about where we want to go with it. So I presented more district level results with a couple of cuts, but principals are really focused on their own school because that's where they really can set things up for success. And each of those 12 questions is really a test that we can teach to. We don't often say we should teach to the test, but if you say we want to make sure that a supervisor or someone at work cares about each person, that's something. What would a 5 look like? What would it take to strongly agree with an item like that? Or to be able to say your coworkers are committed to quality work. What would excellence look like? And Frank and his team have shared those kind of questions with the principals, and those kind of conversations are starting to happen around school by school around the district. So the last slide here, the next steps. For your information here, just to review, we've had individual reports presented to principals and managers. I was here in this room in December, I believe the 9th maybe, and we had a conversation with the managers. We had intended to have a conversation with principals the next day, and one of your 8 snow days happened, or 9, or how many that's been. 11, excuse me. Sorry to rehash that. One of those snow days happened. It was actually an early dismissal, but the principals weren't going to be in a good place to have this kind of a conversation, so they were. We did reschedule that for January, but we had in-person time to really talk through these concepts in more depth, and very, very great participation from the group in those sessions. We followed that up with one-on-one coaching calls. Every principal got a call from Gallup in the month of February from either Kristen Gregory or Nancy Oberst, who are key players on this project team, and had a one-on-one conversation to say, let's talk just about your school here, and really to focus in on, tell me what some of the challenges you have. Some are say, I'm a Title I school, and here's something I'm dealing with. Some say, I've got this kind of turnover. Some say, I'm a brand new principal, or some say, I'm retiring at the end of this year. Whatever their situation was, we were able to unpack that and really get close to the action about that. Linda and her team have integrated the results and action plan, certainly into the strategic plan for the district that you all have done, but also into the school improvement plan for each school. I believe we'll start to see some language about employee engagement included in those school improvement plans as we move forward. And certainly in the future, we're going to continue to study this school by school. You're going to have a school that jumps by a point. You're going to have a school that might be a 3.2 this year, and next year they're going to be a 3.9 or a 4.1 or a 4.2. That's something we need to study and celebrate and say what happened and what did you do, and tell your peers about that, because we want to have those best practices within the district. I mean, we work with 300 different organizations and dozens of school districts around this, but what really matters most to your principals and to your managers is what's happening within your system, because they're all kind of dealing with the same situation, and so that's really what matters. So appreciate your attention, and would be glad to field any other questions you have as we kind of do a summary of year one and launch into the future.
Board members?
I think we're all still trying to absorb some of it, and I do believe that the pieces you put together in your PowerPoint do help highlight some certain items and help us put a framework around some of the other pieces, and then as we have deeper discussions about what happens as a result of this and where are we going, what's the direction, and how do we want to see this, I think we'll all be even more engaged.
Certainly. And I believe you all approved a contract a few months ago that was a 3-year contract, and so principals know and managers know that this isn't a kind of one and done kind of a project, so I believe they're taking it more seriously and really have a real deliberative approach to saying, let's understand this, let's take it serious, and let's make some progress about it as we move forward.
Yes, Mr. Lacy.
Yes. This will be on our website after,
Yes.
right?
Yes, we're moving in that direction.
Okay.
I think the summary that, and I don't know if Rebecca, if this was your authorship, but the summary that you have really walks through some of the finer points here, and I believe that was included in the packet and probably is already out for public review, but yeah, this other information is available as well.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, thank
you,
you
Dr.
very,
Thank you so much,
very
appreciate
much.
it.
Excellent job.
We've made a good start.